Many times people will put a fantasy up, they'll imagine a fantasy, they won't look at the other, they'll have an anxiety about it, they'll have a disturbed state, they'll be living in past and future instead of being present. And that undermines the power of the visualization process. Hi, I'm Dr. John Demartini. I'd like to take just a few moments to share with you some insights I have on the power of visualization and some distinctions that you may not have ever made. We have three states of mind. We can be really present, or we can be living in the past, or you can be living in what we call the future. The past we call memory, the future we call imagination, and the presence we've extracted out space and time from the mind and become very focused and present. When we are into either memory or imagination, it's because we have somehow distorted what's in our mind with a subjective bias. That means that we're actually storing it because our memory and imagination store our illusions into a ready for the truth of something we really love. So what happens is when we are sitting in a memory, we're somehow exaggerating or minimizing something in our focus. And when we're in imagination, we're somehow imagining with a distortion in our focus again. But when all of a sudden we bring our focus into perfect balance, we become present. Now I have made a distinction between memory and rephecy and imagination and prophecy. Because when you're really present, you're actually living it and experiencing it now. So it's not like you feel it's into the future when you're visualizing something. You're actually in it, experiencing it. When you feel it's impossible for you not to fulfill the vision that you hold, and you feel that you're in it, alive, and it's not like it's going to happen someday, but you're actually in it, you're in what I call prophecy and rephecy together, because you've basically integrated time. You've extracted out time. This is where the most powerful creation is. So as long as you're distorting things, you're going to actually be caught in this oscillation of past and future. The second you balance out your perspective, you get present. Now, many times people set goals and have a vision of something that they perceive in the future. But what we found is that as long as they perceive more positives than negatives, more pleasures than pains, more goods than bads, if you will, you're going to actually distort that into the future as imagination. If you see more drawbacks and benefits, or more positives and negatives, any form of distortion in there where you're infatuated with it, with a sort of a philia, or you have a nightmare associated with a phobia, any type of a distortion, your mind will automatically put it into the future and create an anxiety or a fantasy. The second you balance it out and have objective reason, you extract out time and you become present with the image. When you set a goal, the purpose of the executive center in the brain is to strategically lay out a plan, planning strategically to mitigate the risks and make sure you don't set a fantasy as a goal, to make sure you truly set a balanced goal. Because when you go for a goal, many times we set up a goal and we say, oh, I want to do this, and we think, oh my God, we think all the positives of it, we don't think of the drawbacks. We go after it. Well, now we have a fantasy. A fantasy by definition is something in the future that we perceive is going to be more positives than negatives. A nightmare is something in the future we perceive is going to be more negatives than positives. But a real goal is we know that there's both. Just like a magnet, there's going to be both sides, positives and negatives. When we set a goal that has both positive and negatives, and we strategically plan and mitigate the risks of the negatives, and actually hold on to them both, knowing they're both there, we have a realistic, objective goal. That's what allows us to be present and not be living in a fantasy or a nightmare. And the second we set up a fantasy, our intuition brings up a panic and anxiety to try to help us see the other side that we're not seeing. That's why strategic planning is extracting out fantasies and nightmares in our objective and help us become present with our goals. So the difference between imagination and memory, which is basically future and past, and the difference between that and imaging in the present or visualizing the present is the difference between fantasies that don't come true and real goals that do. So I advise you to sit down and strategically plan your goals where you can see the goal in your mind's eye. You think of everything that can go wrong and you mitigate that with a strategy on what to do in case it was occurring. So there's no anxiety. You've relieved their anxiety. You've also neutralized any fantasy about this goal. You're now objective about the goal and it's balanced in the goal. The second you do, you hold your vision on it, you'll be present with it. You'll be inspired by it, you'll be grateful for the opportunity, you'll feel it's already done. And that is where the power is to create the goal. But many times people will put a fantasy up, they'll imagine a fantasy, they won't look at the other, they'll have an anxiety about it, they'll have a disturbed state, they'll be living in past and future instead of being present. And that undermines the power of the visualization process. So set objective goals. That's why it's so important to set goals that are truly congruent and aligned with your highest values, which allows the blood and glucose in the brain to activate the executive center, to allow you to see strategic planning, to mitigate the risk, to be able to handle support and challenge in pursuit of the goal that you have, and allow you to become present where you actually feel that it's impossible for you not to fulfill this. It's already done. It's already done. You're already there. You see it in your mind's eye if it's done. When it's done like that, you create a powerful way of creating your visualizations into reality. So instead of living in fantasies and nightmares, philias and phobias, elations and depressions, and be stuck in the past and future, extract out space and time with your mind, which is what your intuition is doing, and get strategic and balanced and objectives and with your goals, and you'll become very powerful in the creation of visualization. Thank you for joining me for this presentation today. If you found value out of the presentation, please go below and please share your comments. We certainly appreciate that feedback. And be sure to subscribe and hit the notification icons. That way I can bring more content to you and share more to help you maximize your life. I look forward to our next presentation. Thank you so much for joining.